Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Deborah Cottage, and I'm with Prediction Software. I cover sales for the North Central region. And our keynote speaker is here today, James Taylor. So before I introduce James, I'd like to make a few remarks and kind of set the stage of why we're here and the topics that we want to cover. So we're here about predictive analytics, right? And it's a hot topic right now. Organizations are looking at it. Everyone's talking about it. People are interested in it. In fact, Gartner just did a recent study that said that companies and organizations who implement predictive analytics in their business performance metrics expect to realize 20% increase in profitability by the year 2017. So executives and corporations and organizations know that they need it, but there's a significant barrier to adopting it, is what we're finding. And why is that? Well, it's kind of scary. It's new, it's very technical, there's a lack of understanding of what it can do, according to the study done by the Aberdeen Group. There's also a dearth of data scientists out there. So companies don't necessarily have skilled workers to know how to do predictive analytics, know how to build the models. So there's also a lack of support from senior executives. There's a difficulty in quantifying those return on investment. And the reason for that is that the models are there, right? The technology is there. People can, if you got a data scientist, he can build the models or she can build the models, but the insights are not operational. They haven't been operationalized. So companies just don't know what to do with them, the insights. So that is something that James Taylor is going to be addressing for us in a little while. But we, Prediction Software, were founded in 2009 with the vision of predictive analytics has the power to make the world healthier, smarter, and safer. Our passion and our vision is to enable people to predict everything, predict anything, and give it in the hands of those business users and operationalize those results. So specifically what we do is we have a platform where we have simplified the entire process of predictive analytics, from preparing the data to building those models to visualizing the models, right, and being able to collaborate with them, collaborate on them with your colleagues, and most importantly, deploy them to the users who need those insights, right? So if you're a hospital, it would be nurses who are dealing with patients. If you're a bank, it would be perhaps marketing people, marketing new products, or folks who are interested in predicting who is likely to commit fraud. So the important thing I want to make here is that Prediction Software is the only company out there right now who has a platform that is geared for business users. We enable business users themselves who are not technical, okay, who are not data scientists, to be able to build the models. Our platform is also powerful enough and feature-rich enough for data scientists as well. So that is where our differentiator is as a corporation. And we take that to what we call the last mile, which is bringing those insights from those models that your business users have developed, right, and deploying those insights at the point of decision to the frontline users. Okay. Our use cases span many industries, and here are some of them. I'd like to just briefly mention healthcare. Recently, the second largest, or actually I should say one of the top nonprofit hospital organizations, healthcare organizations in the country, Carolina's medical system, purchased Prediction platform a year ago. Within 6 months, they deployed it to 6 hospitals. And they were able to reduce their readmissions, which was their #1 problem. Okay, so they were able to build the predictive models to determine which patients on a specific floor were at the highest risk for readmission. And not only that, but our system was able to tell them what the intervention should be. So the nurse on the floor would come in the morning and see exactly who the patients were, down to the specific patient level, what his history was, and what is the recommended intervention. So the result they got after 6 months was they reduced their readmission rate significantly, and they got a CSTAT score of 80%, which is much higher than the industry average. So right now, Predixion software is showing an 80% accuracy rate, and the industry standard is 65. So we're very proud of that. So we are growing rapidly, and the last 12 months have been really exciting. We've received $30 million, and we've raised $30 million to date. We have some exciting partners up there, and we have a good list of customers, and we're growing rapidly, and we're very excited and very passionate about what we do. So with that, I'd like to introduce James Taylor. We're delighted to have him today. He's the CEO of Decision Management Solutions, and he's a recognized leader right now in the industry. And his passion is to help companies build and use predictive technology into their decision support systems, so operationalize those insights, as we were saying before. So without further ado, I will turn it over. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit this afternoon about how you can predictively enable your organization, to coin a phrase. And I'm going to cover really 3 things. I'm going to talk a little bit about predictive analytics, just to make sure we're all level set, we all mean the same thing. This is a very popular term. I'll talk about how you can get started with predictive analytics, how you can, what steps you need to take to begin with predictive analytics. And then I'll also talk about how you can scale that. Because at the end of the day, none of you, I suspect, are here because you'd like to deploy one predictive analytic model. You're mostly here because you'd like to deploy lots of predictive analytic models and affect your entire organization. So with that, let's talk about predictive analytics. Let's briefly describe what we mean by predictive analytics. And predictive analytics is often sort of lumped into a sort of a category of advanced analytics. People talk about this idea that you need to move up the analytic maturity curve. You need to move from business intelligence, from presenting data, to mining your data, to using data mining techniques, mathematical techniques, and ultimately to predictive analytics. You need to be able to predict things based on the data. So take what's happened in the past and come up with some intelligent probability, some intelligent prediction about what's likely to be true in the future. And you can really do that, in my experience, in sort of 4 broad areas. First of all, you can predict risk. You can say, well, how likely is it that James won't repay this loan? Because if I know that, then obviously I can make decisions about how I'm going to lend him money or not lend him money. I can predict fraud. I can say, how likely is it that this tax return, this request for a refund, a tax refund, is in fact a fraudulent attempt to get money back from me rather than a legitimate one. I can predict opportunity. A lot of this is around customer and customer treatment. How do I decide what offer to present to you, or how do I decide to retain you? Well, I'm going to try and maximize the value, the opportunity that I get out of an interaction with you. And obviously, I can predict demand. I can say, well, how likely am I to get a certain amount of demand in a certain location, or for a certain product, or for a certain size, and I can predict that to help me manage my stock and my environment. And if I want to turn these things into profitable outcomes, I have to do a couple of things. I have to think about, what exactly am I getting out of these predictions? If you take loans, I don't know which loans are going to go bad, and predictive analytics is not going to tell me which loans are going to go bad. What they're going to do is tell me how likely it is that this particular loan will go bad. It's a probability. It's turning uncertainty about the future into some kind of more usable probability, some prediction. That's a probabilistic one. I don't know which claims are fraudulent, but I can predict how likely it is that this claim, this claimant, this network of people involved in a claim are attempting to defraud me. So I can turn my historical data into probabilities on which I can then act, that I can use as part of my decision making. And if I do that, all the data suggests that I can dramatically reduce fraud, I can dramatically increase my rate of customer retention, the extent to which I can develop my customers, make them more profitable. I can better manage my supply chain and my forecast, with better forecasting, and I can manage my risk more accurately. Now, I don't have time to sort of go into a lot of details about how you do predictive analytics, but I'm happy to take questions when we get to the end or later on this evening if you have more specific questions. But let's focus instead on how you can get started with predictive analytics. What is it you need to do first? Well, one of the most sort of critical elements to this is that there's a big shift as you move up that maturity curve, as you change your mindset from thinking about business intelligence for presenting data to a predictive analytic perspective. You have to change something very sort of central to the way you think. You have to move from presenting data for analysis, that being your mindset. Oh, my job is to provide data to people, to help them get the data they need, to present that data to them so that they can make better decisions, to much more explicitly saying, my job is to use analytics, advanced analytics, predictive analytics, to improve the quality of specific decisions. And it's a big shift. I taught a class recently and we had this great conversation. I asked somebody, I said, if you present a BI environment, he was a BI professional, to somebody, you present a dashboard, information to somebody, what decisions are they making with it? And he says, well, I don't really know. That's not really my role. My role is to provide this information. It sort of improves his overall decision making. I don't know what decisions he's trying to make. I just know that if he has this data, he ought, in theory, to be able to make better decisions in a particular area. It's more like it's the milieu within which he makes decisions. It's not something very specific. But that won't work when you come to predictive analytics. You have to be much more explicit about what decision you're trying to improve so that you can build a prediction that's actionable, that's usable. And if you've probably heard the phrase actionable insight, people throw it around a lot. They say, oh, you need to generate actionable insight. And I'm like, well, actually, if you want to make a profit or get a return on investment, what you actually need to do is act on actionable insight. Merely having the actionable insight is necessary, but it's not sufficient to actually get a return on your investment. So you have to act on these things. That means making decisions with these predictions. So it turns out that one of the first things you have to do is be much more explicit about decision making. And it's worth thinking for a moment about what we mean by decision making and what kinds of decisions we might be talking about. If you think about an organization, it typically makes a certain number of strategic decisions. Big one-off decisions that I probably don't revisit, that don't really repeat. Should I buy such and such a company? Should I get out of a particular line of business? Should I do business in the state of Illinois? I mean, big, lumpy decisions that I don't take very often. I make a whole series of tactical decisions, management and control decisions. How should I manage my organization? Do I need to reorganize my supply chain? What's my risk management strategy and is it working for me? Am I acquiring the right kinds of risks that and pricing them accurately? And I make a whole series of operational decisions. Frontline decisions about a single customer, a single transaction, a single claim, a single tax return, a single person that I'm making at the very front line of my organization. I'm making them in my call center, I'm making them when I interact with a customer, in a branch, in a retail setting, and many of my systems are making these decisions. And it turns out, when you're using predictive analytics, that one of the most useful things you can do is focus not at the top of this pyramid, but to focus down at the bottom of this pyramid, to focus instead on operational decisions. There's two reasons for this. The first is, let's face it, this is where all the data that you're using gets generated. It gets generated by these transactional environments. And secondly, if you think about what I said about predictive analytics, what a predictive analytic can do for you is predict how likely something is to be true or false. Well, that something is almost always about a singleton, a single person, a single claim, a single transaction. And so if you want to consume that prediction, by far the most useful way to do it is in a decision that also relates to that singleton. Now, there are some exceptions. There are plenty of good tactical solutions too. But what people tend to get sucked into is thinking about, well, predictive analytics is a strategic initiative for us. We're going to spend a lot of money on it. It's going to be expensive. We've got to hire these expensive people. Therefore, I better focus on a strategic decision that I want to influence. And Peter Drucker once said that there is a tendency to believe that only executives make decisions, or that only executive decisions matter. And this, he said, was a dangerous mistake. And I have a sort of a corollary, which is that senior executives are particularly prone to thinking this, that only their decisions matter and that only their decisions are worth supporting with analytics. But in many ways, they're the hardest group of people to support. So operational decisions really matter, and they have a number of characteristics that make them a good target for predictive analytics. The first is that they're repeatable. You make this decision over and over again, and that does two things. First of all, it generates a lot of data about the decision and the effectiveness of that decision, so you can do analysis. But the other thing is it means that you're not trying to get all your return from a single event. Because if I make thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of decisions, then any improvement in that decision is multiplied by that number of decisions. So we have a bank as a customer, for instance, and they make 40 million customer interaction decisions a month. Not a very big bank, but it's a pretty large number of decisions. Well, any improvement in the effectiveness of that next best action decision that they make when they interact with the customer is multiplied by 40 million every month, and so even quite small improvements start to add up to be very large amounts of money. The second thing, within that subset, you're looking for sort of obviously data-rich, non-trivial decisions. And you want them to be data-rich because you want to be able to build predictive analytics to help you make better decisions. But you also need them to be non-trivial because at the end of the day, you are going to make an investment. And if the decisions are trivially easy to get right, well then your analytics aren't going to help you get all that much better, and therefore you're not going to show a return on that investment. So you're looking for relatively complex but high volume decisions, things that people get better at when they work for you for a long time, people where certain people are much better at it than other people, or where there's clearly competitors who are better at it than you are. Those are examples, those are signs that this is a decision that is non-trivial to make and therefore might be improvable with analytics. The third thing is that you understand what a good decision looks like, and you can prove that you've improved the quality of decisions. One of the things we do when we work with clients very early on is try and say, well, what are the key performance indicators, the metrics that you have? Okay, well, what decisions do you make that make a difference to whether you get a positive outcome in those metrics? Because if you understand that, you can say, well, if I can improve this decision, then I will get a better result showing up in this metric. Well, now you've got a solid business case and you've got a way to measure the effectiveness of analytics. Because you want to be measuring analytics, not in terms of analytic measures, but in terms of business measures. If I'm trying to improve customer retention, then I'd better be retaining more customers. Otherwise, my analytic isn't helping. It doesn't matter how predictive it is, doesn't matter how accurate the prediction is. If at the end of the day, I don't improve my customer retention rate, then I didn't really help. So you have to understand how these decisions impact the things you already measure, the people who are sponsoring the project, leading the project, that they care about. And then lastly, you want them to be action-oriented. You want to be clear in your own mind what it is you're going to do based on these decisions, on these predictions. The best decisions at their heart are a choice between alternative actions. There's 3 things I could do, 10 things I could do, 100 offers I could make you. Well, which one am I actually going to do? Because if I know what that is, I know what that choice is, that point of decision that I have to make, then it will be easy to see whether I've made a better decision. It'll be easy to record the fact that I made the decision a certain way, and easy, therefore, to see how well my analytics work. So you're looking for decisions that have these kinds of characteristics. They're high volume, transactional-oriented decisions are going to be your best bet for predictive analytics. Now, one of the challenges that you face when you start thinking this way is that we have to shift our perspective a little bit. If you've been working in business intelligence or other kinds of analytics, the tendency is to deliver analytics focused on people. How do I help people make decisions? How do I put information in front of people so they will make better decisions? Well, that's great. And it's still often the case when you're automating or delivering predictive analytics to these operational decisions that there's still someone there who needs to be able to see information, see the analytics to understand what they should do. But it is also true that more and more of these decisions will take place in your systems. Your website decides things, your mobile app decides things, the call center app decides things for the call center reps. The handheld devices your drivers have or the point of sale terminals in your stores, those places are where the decision has to happen. Because the person using those things doesn't have the time, doesn't have the skills, doesn't have the display capability. So you're going to have to be able to embed your predictions and your decision making into your systems. And that's a shift away from thinking only about people to thinking about people and about systems. Decision management, as we call it, not just decision support. Or at least you need to be able to blend these two things. You need to be able to rebalance how your people and your computers are used to make a decision. Today, we overwhelmingly rely on our computers only to manage the data and move it around. And all the decision making, we sort of defer to the users of the system. How many systems do you have in your companies? There's a workflow, it tracks along, and every time a decision is required, it stops and waits for someone to come along and kick it and tell it what to do next. If you're really lucky, it tells you it's waiting for you to come along and kick it and tell it what to do next, but mostly it just stops and goes, okay, well, I can't do that. So humans got to come and do that. So you have to rejig your thinking about how you're going to balance computerization and human decision making around these decisions. And one last comment about these decisions before I talk about scaling predictive analytics. One of the things that you notice about a lot of these decisions is that they are tremendously customer centric. They are decisions about a single customer. So if you have efforts underway, as many of you probably do, to become more customer-centric or member-centric, to be segments of one, those kinds of words that get used, well, what you're talking about there is making decisions about an individual customer. I'll give you an example of what I mean. If I send out a piece of direct mail, and I send it to everyone in this room, and thousands of other people, I would, as a marketer, I might say, well, I've made 4 or 5 decisions. I've decided what list to pull, what offer to make, what creative to use, maybe what color to use. That's what I've done, right? That's the decisions I've made. But I would argue that you've made 10,000 decisions. You've made decisions in me, that, and you, and you, and you. And I've decided each time, I've decided the same way. I've sent you all the same piece of direct mail. But I've still made 10,000 decisions about customers or prospects. Because you'll react to that piece of direct mail like it was sent only to you. Think about it. When you get a piece of direct mail, how many of you look at it and go, gosh, I must be in some segment that some direct marketer thinks is going to get a 3 or 4% response rate for this piece of direct mail? And how many of you think, what a stupid piece of junk mail? Well, almost everyone thinks, what a stupid piece of junk mail, even if they are, in fact, professionally someone who sends out junk mail. It's still how they react. And it's not because you're bad people or awkward or just trying to make marketers' lives difficult. It's because that is, in fact, how you think. And so the great thing about focusing on these operational decisions is it gives you a vehicle for really thinking about, well, how do I want to treat this customer at this moment? I'm going to make a decision just for them. And the reason most companies haven't done that historically is they had no way to differentiate. They didn't know what to say to you. So if they don't know what to say, well, why not say the same thing to everybody? But now with analytics, well, now you do have a way to tell what you should say to people. And so you can start thinking about these things in a much more individualistic way. All right, so that focus on decisions, on operational decisions, and on predicting risk or fraud or opportunity or demand so that I can improve the quality of those decisions, take action on that prediction at an operational level is how you get started with predictive analytics. But like I said, I don't suppose most of you are here because you want to learn how to get one predictive analytic model deployed. And certainly, people don't buy infrastructure, they don't invest in predictive analytics, they don't hire people because they want to deploy a single model. They want to enable their organization to become more predictive. So the first challenge you have to face is a reality of the predictive analytics market, as it grew up when it was hard and expensive and very time-consuming to build predictive analytic models. When the first credit score was calculated, they had to borrow what was then the largest mainframe computer in the Bay Area, which was owned by Chevron, and run it all weekend to generate the first batch of credit scores. This is no longer necessary. Not only is Chevron no longer the largest computer system in the Bay Area, Google and Facebook probably run slightly larger computer systems, but you don't need anything like that kind of compute power. You don't need that kind of compute power, and it's a lot easier to get that compute power than it used to be. But data mining and predictive analytics grew up in this world, and so it is a little bit artisanal. Me and my tools handcrafting the perfect model in my back room to give you a perfect model. And they're beautiful things, handcrafted, they're all little curlicues and carvings on them, and they're just so, right? And if you give a data miner or a predictive analytics professional half a chance, they will tell you exactly why this model is perfectly carved and what all these little bells and whistles mean. But that's not really what you need if you're trying to scale predictive analytics. You need a much more industrial mindset. You're not thinking, I need a perfect single chair that's beautifully carved and everything else. You're thinking, I need a trip to IKEA, I need 1,000 chairs. So you have to think in a much more industrial way about the kinds of tools and processes and approaches you're going to use. And what a lot of companies do is they start off saying, well, for the first model, it'll be okay if we do this. And then later, when we scale up, then we'll worry about this other stuff. And the problem is, what most organizations find is that once you've started a certain way and those are the people you hire and that's the way you build the first model, it's very hard to get out of that mindset. So you need to begin with a much more industrial mindset. So instead of looking at capabilities for predictive analytics that tend to be focused on a single user, that are focused on me and my scripts, handcrafting the perfect script to build this model that's hard to share, that tends to run on my machine, use my server resources, and is really focused on creating the perfect model. You need a different kind of analytic infrastructure. You need an analytic infrastructure that's much more focused on lots of people building models, on collaboration and helping people work together on large-scale projects. That's about model management, so that once I have 1,000 models, I can find them, see which ones are working, which ones need to change. And that is much more focused on workflow, on managing these things as though they are real corporate assets, rather than just a little bit of script you wrote. For those of us who are old, like me, predictive analytics today feels like, writing code in the 70s, right? It's just like me and my COBOL code, and it's self-documenting code, right? Someone told me COBOL was self-documenting, so I'm just going to write my code, and we're just going to hack a bunch of code, and then at some point it all comes crashing down because we can't manage it anymore. Well, we're going through that same transition here with predictive analytics, and the jury is out as to whether we will learn from what happened with code, or whether we'll insist on learning all the lessons again ourselves as analytics professionals. So you have to think about technology that's going to scale up and give you this kind of industrial scale when it comes to building models. Now, the second way you can scale infrastructure, obviously, is using the cloud. Now, cloud is a hot topic these days, and particularly when it comes to predictive analytics, there's a lot of people who argue over, well, should I be doing predictive analytics in the cloud? Should I be putting my data in the cloud, running my modeling in the cloud, take advantage of all that cloud scalability, or should I be running it in-house on my servers where I've got more control and I've got perhaps better price performance and so on. And I've done a lot of survey work on predictive analytics in the cloud, and there's a lot of interest in predictive analytics in the cloud. But really you end up finding that the use cases and the justification for both can be compelling. You can find it very easy to get started with cloud-based technologies, that you can move that first set of data or get access to that first set of data, build predictive analytics in the cloud, get rapid deployment. You can show the value without having to go buy a bunch of hardware and install a bunch of software internally. A lot of people I talk to, it's not that their IT departments don't want to help them, they just physically cannot. They are so far behind. They've been squeezed, it's cost reduction, that the IT department, even if they wanted to, couldn't spin up a new server for you to run predictive analytics on. It's just not possible. And so you're looking for technologies that you can perhaps get started with in the cloud, that are easy to run in-house as you start to get into more sensitive areas. You start to worry about more of your on-premise data. You've got to worry about security and privacy, perhaps. And so something that lets you mix and match these things is easier generally to scale. Now, there's lots of ways to do this. There's lots of different ways to run predictive analytics in the cloud or on servers or locally. But you need to think about how are we going to scale this up? How do we get started quickly, but in a way that will be, as I say, repeatable and scalable later? Now, another sort of aspect of scalability comes in this sort of action focus. At the end of the day, what I want to do is take the right, most profitable, most appropriate action each time I make one of these decisions. And I'm hoping that predictive analytics will help me do this. But what often happens when you start working with analytics, particularly early on when you first start using analytics, is that you get your data and you can build some great analytic insight from it. And that's lovely, but it's not at all clear how you're going to use that to influence this action at scale. If the action I want to change, the example that was given at the beginning, is whether a particular nurse on the floor at the point where they're meant to let you leave decides that you shouldn't in fact leave, that you should stay because the risk of readmission is too high, well, how do you make sure that analytic is going to be delivered effectively down at that point of decision so that the right action gets taken? And so you need infrastructure that's going to be focused not only on delivering this insight, but on then how am I going to use it to make decisions? And that needs to work whether I'm going to give you the analytics so you can make the decision, or I'm going to embed the decision in some kind of system so the system can make the analytic, or I'm going to do some mix of these two things. I have to be able to get these analytics out into the point of decision, out to the point of action, regardless of what that looks like. So I have to be able to scale my deployment infrastructure as well. You see a lot of focus on in-database analytics and in pushing analytics out to the point of content. You see a lot of folks thinking in terms of how do I not only visualize analytics, but perhaps execute them as part of a more programmatic interface. All of those things can be important aspects to deploying analytics, and you need to make sure you have a wide range of possible deployment options. But those are all really sort of technology-oriented questions about scale. But there's also a sort of set of philosophical questions about scale. How do I get to the point where I am a true analytic competitor, to use Tom Davenport's phrase, where I'm really doing everything in an analytic way? I'm focused on analytics, I'm using analytics in every decision, I'm scaling that across my organization. And for a lot of organizations, they're like, well, how do I do that? How do I get into analytics in that way without having to get this big infrastructure budget where someone lets me come and build a bunch of infrastructure that has no business value tied to it. It's just an infrastructure investment. I don't know about your organizations, but what I've noticed is that the vast majority of people I work with no longer make those kinds of investments. They're really looking for some kind of business outcome to be tied to every technology investment. It's not enough to say, well, we need to integrate the data, or we need to clean the data, or we need to analytically enrich the data. It's like, well, why? What's the business outcome that we're going to get from this investment? And so the way you scale analytics in these circumstances is one decision at a time. So you begin not by saying, what data do I have? How can I build analytics on that data? Okay, now I've got some great analytics. Can I improve decision making? Instead, you say, no, I've got a decision that I need to improve. I'm going to see what analytics would help me improve that decision. I like to say you ask the if only question. Well, here's a decision I have to make. If only I knew X, or if only I knew Y, I'd be able to make a better decision. If I'm processing a claim, if only I knew if you were who you said you were. If only I knew if you'd really had that service that you're claiming. If only I knew if you were related to the person who assessed the damage to your car. Well, analytics can tell you how likely it is that those things are true, and therefore can help you make a better decision. So now I know what analytic I need. Well, how am I going to build that analytic? What data do I need? Where am I going to get that data from? Do I have that data in my warehouse? Do I have it somewhere else in some other data store? Can I buy that data from some third party? But all of those questions are driven by some business outcome. I'm going to improve the quality of a particular decision, and that enables me to tie all those investments to it. And I can land and expand. Essentially, I can work on a decision, I can work on the next decision, and as I work through them, I reuse analytics, I reuse data, and gradually I build out an enterprise-scale infrastructure. So even if an enterprise-wide use of analytics is your objective, it's still by far the most effective way to get there, focusing on one decision at a time. Now, anyone here from a marketing role? Okay, so you're used to the idea of A/B testing, that kind of thing. One of the things about analytics that's a real problem is that often you've done the same thing every single time, right? That you've only treated customers one way, you've only displayed one piece of content on the web page, you only always do the same thing because you've never had a reason to not do that, which means, of course, you have no data as to say, well, whether there's a better way, because you've always done the same thing. And so one of the things you have to get good at if you're going to really scale analytics is experimentation. You have to be able to start off perhaps with something rather inaccurate and gradually use the data you capture to come up with an increasingly accurate prediction and outcome so that you get better over time. And this is a real challenge for a lot of organizations. Outside of marketing, most people are not good at experimenting, particularly not on their customers. You can just imagine, you go to the chief customer officer and say, hey, we've got these customers, I want to experiment on some of them. And most of the experiments won't work. It'll piss customers off, it won't treat them as well as the default, but I got to experiment, otherwise I don't know, and they're going to look at you funny. You want to experiment on our customers? No. But if you don't experiment, it's very hard to push analytics out everywhere you're going to need them, because you're just going to find you don't have the data. You have to run experiments to create the data that will let you then say, okay, well, this kind of person responds better to that kind of message, and this kind of person responds better to that kind of message, so now I'm going to use analytics to put you in one of those two buckets and treat you more appropriately. So get good at experimentation. Think now about how am I going to show people that analytic experimentation is going to work. And sort of two related tips to that. One is marketing is often your friend in this case, because there are at least marketers understand what A/B testing means. They may not have used it about decision making in quite the same way. They've often done it for color or layout or creative or something. But nevertheless, the idea of an experiment is not anathema to them. The second tip is I'm always asked, well, which part of the business should I start in? How do I tell what my first target should be? And I said, well, find the nerdiest, geeky executive at the certain level that you can find. And the reason for this is clear. If you go listen to, I'm a faculty member for the International Institute for Analytics, which Tom Davenport runs, and we've had a lot of conversations about this. And one of the things I've noticed is if you look at organizations, business units, organizations that are really deeply analytic, they're almost without exception run by people who are ex-risk officers, ex-actuaries, ex-operations research people, or other mathy, geeky kind of people, right? We are not doing, as an industry, a very good job getting, if you like, run-of-the-mill execs to believe that they should make their organization analytic. And so if you want to look at your organization and say, well, where should I start? One of the things to look for is there anyone in your management team who's a bit geeky? Got a math degree or a stats background, a bit of risk manager at a bank, anything like that that might show you that they've got some kind of, mathy geekiness to them, because they'll understand experimentation, they'll understand why you need control groups, they'll understand why the data is not going to be absolute, it's going to be gray, but it's going to give you a sense of what to do. Free tip, as they say. Everything else being equal, look for the geek. But the other side of this is that as you scale out to the enterprise, you have to think about how you're going to make this experimentation part of your environment. So it's often good to think of this sort of as a decision loop, right? I've got a customer. Hopefully I put my customers at the middle of my focus, right? I make decisions about those customers based on the information I have. Well, that means I take an action. I take the action my decision says is the best one. Great. Now they react to that. And if I'm lucky, I capture information that tells me they've reacted to it. Perhaps I get an immediate piece of data that tells me that. Perhaps I have to wait and see that they don't come back. And then I get that sort of negative data, if you like. But I go around this loop. But what I want to do is I want to say, well, how do I get better at decision making? How do I improve the quality of that decision making? Well, to do that, I need to add a second loop. I need to capture my data about my decision making. I need to compare it to my business results and say, okay, is this working for me? Is this decision working well? Do I need to update the models that I have, the analytics that I'm using to make this decision? Are there new segments I need to identify, or different treatments that might need different predictions? Are there rules and policies that I wrap around these analytics that I now need to change to make sure that I can exploit those analytics effectively? Do I need to challenge what I'm doing? Do I need to say, okay, well, here's how I think things work, but maybe they work this other way, so I'm going to try a different set of models or a different set of ways to use those models to try and see if there's a better way to get a better result. And I need to put in place that loop. I need to put in place that continuous improvement loop if I'm really going to scale analytics up and do it across the board. So, last slide before I take some questions. If you are looking at analytics and you want to say, I want to begin with predictive analytics, or I want to get started with predictive analytics in a way that's going to scale up, it's going to get me to an enterprise scale, to predictively enable my enterprise, you've got a number of steps you need to go through. Obviously, first step, step 0 if you like, is you've got to understand what predictive analytics can do for you and help your organization understand that. You're going to focus on the right kinds of decisions. You'll look at these high volume, operational, repeatable decisions and say, okay, how could I improve this decision? What kind of analytics will help me with this? I'm going to look at how do I industrialize this process? How do I make sure that I'm building these analytics, these early analytics, in a way that's going to turn out to be repeatable, where I'm going to be able to build more analytics, scale up my analytic creation effort. I got to focus on how I'm going to scale that from an organizational point of view, from a deployment point of view, from a business value point of view. I've got to be able to get out of that first silo where I deliver my first piece of value. And I've got to be able to expand it continuously. I've got to be able to find new opportunities, expand those, take advantage of shared resources for sure, but I've got to focus each time on some kind of business outcome. And that sort of creates the ongoing improvement loop. Now we're almost done, we're working on a white paper on this topic, which you'll get sent by the folks at Prediction. So trying to lay out these different steps, talk about these different steps, give you some tips and advice around how to make this transition from thinking about predictive analytics to actively, predictively enabling the organization that you belong to. So with that, what I do is take some questions. I have a few wrap-up slides for the end, and I'll be at the reception later, so you'll be able to ask me individual questions then if you don't feel like asking it in front of an audience. But if you have general questions you want to ask now, we've got plenty of time for questions. Yeah, go ahead.
So for the cloud thing, you said, even I am just starting the analytics in the organization, so I didn't get your point. What exactly? Did you say that cloud is better or internal infrastructure is better, or it always depends?
Well, to some extent, it always depends, right? You can tell I'm a consultant. It always depends. But I would say, in general, cloud is a very good place to start. Most folks, when they first start with predictive analytics, will find a couple of things. First of all, they're not going to be encouraged or allowed to work on really sensitive decisions and really sensitive data. Secondly, they're often going to find that the data they have is not stored or accessible in ways that are terribly helpful for building predictive analytics. So they're already going to have to be moving some data around or buying some external data or doing something different. And the cloud is a great platform for that. It lets you get started easily. You're pushing only a modest amount of data from your systems up into the cloud. Often you're using data you can get in the cloud. And you don't have to worry about, do I have a server that will run this? And you can get through that early stage, get started quickly. So cloud is a great platform for your first predictive analytics efforts. Now, I've done some survey work on predictive analytics in the cloud. And what we noticed was that there were a lot of people using it sometimes. And a small core of people who did everything in the cloud. They did everything, all their analytics in the cloud. But most people, once they get to any kind of scale, they're still using a lot of data that's inside their systems. And it's just expensive to push all that data into the cloud in the first place. So yes, it's a great place to start. And for some organizations, it's a great place to finish. But in general, most organizations end up with a mix, but often start by trying out cloud-based tools. So great place to start. Okay. Anybody else? You're a very quiet group, no questions. Sure? You can always ask me later. Yeah, go ahead. Here we go.
How do you convince the executive team to kind of invest in going forward with predictive analytics when the probability might not be as high as more than 50%, right?
Right.
And therefore, my growth might not happen right away.
Right. That's a good question. So there's a couple of things. So I used to believe that if you wanted to get executive teams to back analytics, you had to get them to use analytics. And I was disabused of this with a client. And we had this privately held company we did some work for. And it was interesting because they basically were guys who'd owned this company for 30 years. And they were like, we've got 30 years experience running this company. We don't need no stinking analytics. And frankly, they probably didn't actually need any stinking analytics because they did in fact know. They could feel the business that they were in and its seasonal shifts and everything else. And so what we did is we said, okay, well, tell us how you measure the business. What measures make you feel good about it? How do you measure your own success? And they told us what those metrics were. And we said, okay, now let's take those metrics. And now let's ask this next question, which is, well, what decisions get made in the organization that have impact on these metrics? And there must be some, because you set metrics to change behavior. Behavior is about making decisions. So you're obviously hoping that people will make decisions because they know this is a metric. Therefore, there must be a set of decisions that have an impact on the metric. Okay, they tell us. And then the first few are their own decisions, or the decisions of the people who work for them. And we keep pushing and pushing. And what we found is we were able to walk them through the organization, and they discovered, to their own surprise, that many of these key metrics were impacted by decisions made by people who didn't have 30 years experience, like people in the call center who were hired like yesterday, and they knew exactly how little training these people had and how little understanding of the business they had. Or in their case, they were a travel company, people who worked in resorts that were 8 time zones away. And it was amazing how their attitude changed at that point, because they were like, okay, you think you can improve their decision making? Okay, I can believe that, because their decision making is probably crappy. Because we hired them yesterday. Of course their decision making is going to be crappy, or they've got 17 seconds before they have to decide. So they have no time to make a good decision. And so that shifted the conversation, because now we're like, okay, well, those people are frankly guessing. So now maybe it is only 60-40, but you know what? They'd still be ahead, because right now they might as well toss a coin, because they've got nothing. They've got no idea what the right answer is. And so you can change the dynamic of the conversation. Once you get it away from the highly paid, well-trained, experienced managers and executive types, and you start focusing on more operational decisions, well, now I'm much more interested in marginal improvement, because there's a lot of them, and I don't trust them very much. I'm much less sensitive to the fact that you're trying to replace me with a computer. Well, no, I'm not trying to replace you with a computer. I'm trying to make people who are, at the very front line of the organization more effective. And so that often is enough of a shift to get people interested. And then, I often say to people, people say, oh, top down, you got to get the executive team to believe it, then you get managers, and you can push it out. Then you can go to pervasive analytics. And I'm like, well, actually, I think the reverse is true. If you want to get to the point where your executive team is coming to the analytics people and saying, help us with the business strategy, then you have to have started at the bottom and show that your analytics can help deliver the current business strategy, however flawed it might be, and work your way back up to the point where I say, well, you guys are getting really good at helping us make what we want to have happen. Is there any data that might tell us what we should try and make happen? And so I would reverse the flow. And my experience has been it's a lot easier to get executive support for improving those. Now, the one qualification I will say, how many of you have ever read Larry Bossidy's book, Execution? Okay, so you need an executive who thinks that's an executive job. The kind of executive, if you go to an executive's office and they've got execution on their bookshelf, that's a good target, because that means they think that it's not about business strategy, or not only about business strategy, that they've also got to understand how their business operates and how to improve the operation of their business. Someone who's done Six Sigma. Anyone who's focused on these kind of operational, continuous improvement things, this really resonates with them because it's a way to improve it. If you've got an executive who believes that my job is to sort of, stand on the front of the ship and point, not so much, because they don't really care how the engine room operates. So, but that would be my tip. Start at the bottom. Any other questions? Yeah.
Would this work if you were with tactical decisions?
It does work with tactical decisions. The general rule of thumb is it's a little bit like earthquake risk, right? You always take the potential damage from an earthquake multiplied by the likelihood of one, right? So I live out in California. I'm much more likely to get an earthquake than you guys. But on the other hand, all the buildings I'm in are built to withstand earthquakes. You're much less likely to get an earthquake, but none of the buildings you work in are built to withstand earthquakes. So you can multiply those two things together, you get an overall risk. Well, with decision making, what you find is the number of times you make the decision multiplied by the gap between a good decision and a bad decision. So if you've got tactical decisions that still get made reasonably often by a reasonably large number of people, so not one person, but a set of people, and there's a big difference between how well some people make the decision and how well other people make the decision, then they're still a good candidate. It's a little bit more tricky from an organizational perspective, because these tend to be people who are pretty confident in their decision making. You're more likely to be looking at that blended solution. You're more likely to be able to say, here's the overall decision. You make all these pieces, but this bit here, we can do an analytic that will help you with that bit. Or we can do an analytic that will help you with this bit. And then you can use those as part of your decision making. And you'll need to have some really good measurement infrastructure, because you'll need to be able to show the 10 sales managers or the 100 sales managers that the 5 who are really using analytics are doing better than the ones who are not using analytics. And the trick there is not the result measurement, it's the analytic use measurement. The great thing about an operational environment is that most companies measure call center reps. They know what they click on, they know what they do, they know what they measure the website, they measure the systems at that operational level. And so it's easy to gather not easy, but it's practical to gather the data of, well, who opened the script that was generated from the analytic and who didn't. I can't guarantee you read the script, but I can tell who didn't bother to open the script. When you get into a tactical decision, you're presenting data to people. And you're probably going to present the data to everyone. And so then the question is, well, who read it and who didn't read it? So you probably need to set up a test where not everybody gets the analytic. So you get a couple of people to volunteer to get the analytic. You measure them before they have the analytic. You give them the analytic, you measure them afterwards, and you show they got better at it. Because it's really hard to show who's using an analytic at a tactical level, and it's really easy at an operational level. So that's That's the biggest difference. It does work for tactical decisions because they do repeat. You do have data. They're not as, not like one-off, but they're a little bit harder to measure who's using the analytic, who's not. So that's why I tend to start with the lowest level I can get away with in an organization, because it's easier to get that data. All right, so let me wrap up. Three going away tips. I always like to have going away tips at the end because you never quite know what questions you're going to get. Now today I've got great questions. They're all full of great going away tips. But sometimes you get the most random questions. So it's always good to say, well, I want to bring it back and say the 3 things I care about, right? So 3 specific pieces of advice if you want to predictively enable your organization. And if you were asleep for the rest of the presentation and only wake up for this bit, you're probably still good. First one, I like to misquote the late Stephen Covey. You have to begin with the decision in mind. If you are going to use predictive analytics, more advanced analytics, you have to really break this habit that we've all developed with BI, which is that my job is simply to put a bunch of data in front of people and they will make better decisions. As we were saying, build it and they will come. If I spend enough money on analytic infrastructure, my decision making will improve. Well, with predictive analytics, it will only improve if you know which decision you're actually trying to improve, you understand what a better decision looks like, and you're actually focused on the decision. So begin with the decision in mind, not with the data, not with the analytic. Secondly, you need to build what I call the 3-legged stool of analytics. You need to get your IT professionals, your analytic professionals, your data scientists, the people who are working, and the people who own your business to collaborate. And you need them to focus on these decisions as a set. Organizations that are successful using predictive analytics overwhelmingly start projects with all 3 groups represented. And if you have a separate operations group, all 4 groups represented. They don't allow the analytics team to go off and try and build an analytic. They don't let the IT guys go off and try and build an analytic. They say, no, we're going to put analytic skills, system skills, business skills, operation skills together at the very beginning of the project. And it can seem like a little bit of a waste. People say, well, but we haven't even figured out if we can do the analytic yet. And the answer from folks who've gone through this is it doesn't matter. Because just because you can do the analytic doesn't mean it's going to help improve the business outcomes, and doesn't mean you can actually practically get access to that data when you need to. So you have to have everybody involved right at the beginning. So beginners, you mean to go on, get those 3 groups to be part of how you start with predictive analytics. And lastly, remember that the end goal here is a predictively enabled organization. And that means you're going to have to think about how you're going to industrialize this. And that means that's going to limit how much you can learn from people who've perhaps been doing it a long time, or people who've got onesie-twosie areas where they use analytics, because they tend to be able to do it in a much more artisanal way. If I'm a bank and I've got risk models, I have a banking customer, as I talked earlier. They're very sophisticated when it comes to risk analytics, but you don't need very many models in risk analytics. And so they're handcrafted and they're reviewed by regulators. There's this whole, handcrafted thing going with them. Well, when you get into marketing, they need hundreds, thousands of propensity models to decide what offers to make people. Well, they start and they try and build the models the way they've always built the models. And it doesn't work. So you have to think about, how am I going to scale this up? And that means thinking differently about the kind of analytic infrastructure you need right from the beginning. Thank you very much.